Thank you very much and welcome to today's webinar on crafting the core components of grants application. I do know that there are different types of grants. Some are fellowship applications. Some are, expression of interest at the beginning stage. And then there are some that are also full proposal. But depending on the grant you're applying for, some of what we'll be talking about today will be applicable. Whether it's an expression of interest, whether it's a fellowship application, or whether it's a full proposal that you're working on, you would see several of these sections in your proposal, in your application. But of course, you will need to tailor each of these components to your needs. So typically in a grant application, you will provide an executive summary that will provide an overview of the entire write-up. So there will be a context or a sort of background that will lay out the problem you aim to address. And then there will be objectives that you aim to accomplish, as well as the outcomes you aim to accomplish. You will lay out the methods or approach you want to use to accomplish those objectives. Often you will have a theory of change, as well as how you're going to measure, monitor, evaluate, and document learning in your proposal. Also, you will work on a budget and justify your budget, and then you will reflect on risk, as well as how you are going to mitigate those risks. You're going to have a work plan, timeline, as well as milestones that will lay out what you will accomplish when. And then you have the personnel, who are the people that will work on the grant. And then depending on the application you are making, there will be a resource or institution section where you will talk about the resources you have to support the project, or institutional support you will get to support your project. We're going to look at each of these components more keenly. So typically, you want to provide a concise yet a thorough overview of the project, covering its essential component in an executive summary. While you want to be as concise as possible, you also want to share enough details in this section to allow reviewers to quickly get interested in your proposal. Ability to do this well will make or mar the proposal, because if the executive summary of the abstract, so to say, is uninteresting, maybe they are not even interested in reading the entire thing. And in a competitive grant, say they want to award 10 applications, often they will receive a minimum of 200 applications, depending on the topic. In some cases, even if they want to shortlist 10, they might even receive up to 1,000 applications. So your ability to immediately endear yourself to the reviewers would really work well in them getting interested in reading the rest of your proposal. So basically, you want to describe the issue or need that is being addressed. You want to quickly, outline the project's main goal and objectives, and then the details, proposed method, and strategies for achieving them. Also, you want to highlight the anticipated results or impact of the project. And if you do this very well, and as well as some principles that you would use to ensure equity, fairness in the work you are doing, would also be interesting. For example, there are concepts like co-designing intervention. If you are proposing an intervention, what principle is guiding the design? It might be human-centered design, for example, as an approach that is guiding it, sort of a theoretical frame that's guiding the design of the intervention. Maybe it's also a participatory methodology you are using to canvas opinion of the beneficiary of the intervention, so that their needs are factored in your design. All of these principles you must also include in the abstract or the executive summary. Typically, executive summary serves as a compelling introduction to the proposal, enabling donors and stakeholders to quickly understand the project's importance and potential. Now, are there word limits? Often, some proposals would allow for word limits. So they will tell you that executive summary is maybe 300 words, 200 words, 250 words, 400 words, 500 words. Depending on the call they're applying to, often they state it, but if they do not state it, please keep this section short and not more than 1 page at the maximum. But if you can even do it in half a page, that is really good. So you need to cut dead weight words. You need to cut all those adverbs that add unnecessary words to your write-up. You just cut all of them. And but then without missing the important information you want to pass across. And also know that the success of your application depends on the summary you provide. Now, typically, even though I presented the executive summary first, it's probably what you write last. In most cases, it's what we're going to write last, as the last thing after you've completed your draft. Also, we have an overview or a context section, or an introduction, so to say, where you offer critical information to help the donor understand the environment in which the project will operate. You want to explain the current situation, highlighting the problem the project aims to address using relevant statistics or data. The good thing about data is it helps people to understand the magnitude and the dimension of the problem. And then one question that you might have in your mind is, what if I'm working on an area where there is no data? How do I navigate this? So I would say, if you anticipate that you want to work in an area that there is no data, why not begin by doing a small study on the topic to generate that data, and then advance that work. Maybe you can apply for funding to do a preliminary study to generate evidence of the magnitude of this problem, and then you can then advance it before developing solutions to those problems. So that might be a smart way to begin in an area where there is no data. But typically in most areas you will find some data that will help you contextualize the problem, the prevalence, the dimension of the problem, the risk factors that predict the problem. This will help us to understand whether the solutions you're proposing would address the problem that you aim to study. You also want to discuss historic or environmental elements that have led to the issue. You want to clearly define the socio-economic or environmental context, emphasizing the project's necessity and impact. So a good introduction typically would establish why that project is even needed. It will establish what problem you are addressing and why. It will establish it will justify the need for your projects. And people should be able to, come out of reading that introduction with greater insight on the need to tackle the problem. After you've done an introduction that lays out the problem you want to accomplish, you want to address, it's also important to set out the objectives your project aims to accomplish. This is very important because if I'm giving you $2 million, I need to know what you want to achieve with those $2 million. So you need to set clear objectives or smart objectives that are achievable, that are measurable, time bound and all that. You don't want to say things that is probably impossible to accomplish, or you don't want to say things that will take even 20 years to accomplish. So, it has to be a clear objective that is reasonable within the time limit permit. It serves as a centerpiece of blueprint for the entire grant, guiding the rest of the proposal. It's concise, yes, exciting. It highlights all aspects of the proposal in an engaging way without delving into too much detail. And then it directs the reader and establishes the framework for the grant's application and significance. An example is ensure safe, equitable, and dignified access to critical sexual and reproductive health services in humanitarian setting. in Africa. That might be an example of an overall objective. And then an outcome could be improved access to quality sexual and reproductive health services for internally displaced people or internally displaced adolescents by conflicts in DRC or whatever country you want to do it. So you want to lay out a clear objective or clear outcomes that you aim to accomplish. Now, having done that, you also want to now describe your approach to tackling or to meeting those objectives you've set. And it's important that you present an approach for each of the objectives, except maybe it's a research application where the method you are using is applicable to all your objectives. So in a research project, for example, maybe you're doing a qualitative study that sort of help you answer all three objectives you lay out. But more often than not, in a grant application, the objectives might require to accomplish each of maybe 4 or 5 objectives you've set out. So it's important to think about this method in terms of writing the methodology to accomplish each of the objectives and take it one step at a time. So you want to describe the method and strategy we use to achieve the project's goal and objective. You want to explain how the approach aligns with the stated problem and desired outcomes. And then you want to outline the activities to be undertaken and their sequences. Also, you want to include key milestones and a timeline to demonstrate progress in this section. And this section is really important because this is probably the section that would carry the most mark when they evaluate you. So it's important that you dedicate enough time and ensure that the method you are proposing, it's probably the best method to tackle the problem or to achieve the objective you've laid out. Now, the methodology or approach varies and depending on the objective. Say, for example, you want to, services in an IDP, for example. And to accomplish that, you might set out sub-objective along the line. One example might be you want to do community engagement to introduce the project to the community. So you want to do demand generation in the community. Maybe you want to do a door-to-door campaign and all that to generate the demand for SRE services. That's one objective, maybe sub-objective on its own, and that requires its own resources, that require its own different approach and methodology for holding these sort of community outreaches. And 2, you might also deal with the supply side. You might also want to train health providers, for example, on respectful and quality care, such that as you're generating demand, you're also ensuring that the supply side it's available, so that you're not driving demand, but there's no supply. Because both would work hand in hand. So you also want to lay out all the activities you will do to ensure that there is supply of quality services in the community. And even as you are doing that as well, you also want to generate evidence of whether what you are doing works. You want to do monitoring, you want to do learning, you want to lay out how you document learning. All those can also be sub-objective. And specific approaches to accomplishing all these sub-objectives needs to be laid out in your approach and method. Also, it's always good to include a theory of change. Remember, maybe you have written in your introduction that people do not have access to sexual and reproductive health services in humanitarian settings because of all kinds of reasons, breakdown in supply chain, lack of commodities, all those things you've laid out in your introduction, and that's the problem you're tackling. It's always important to have a theory of change on how you see all the activities you are proposing to address the problem and then to result in the outcomes you want to see. So laying out a theory of change to say, I'm going to do A, B, C, D, that is tackling this particular problem that will result into this change. That way of thinking is usually, it's usually the language, or it's actually the way of thinking in a grant application. I want to pursue these outcomes with these activities to address this problem. And then these are the assumptions I've got in mind, that if I do this, like this, like this, like this, I'm going to tackle this problem and I'm going to create this change. That is the kind of story that you want to tell the funder, and that makes them fund your proposal. And it's important to have a picture, a diagram that lists out the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impacts. And even in doing that, there must be a logic behind it. I'm going to train providers to address stigma, to address provider bias, to improve their attitude, to make services more of good quality. I'm going to do demand generation in the community to address myths and misconceptions around contraceptives. I'm going to engage the community leaders who are gatekeepers, the church leaders, on why it's important to use contraceptive. I'm not going to call it family planning because maybe adolescents are not planning families. But I'm going to say that it's important to space children, and contraceptives is a tool for child spacing as well, as opposed to thinking about contraceptives as a tool to prevent pregnancy. So I'm going to do community child engage community leader, engage men, and in all this community to generate demand for services. And I'm going to also train providers, provide commodities to ensure supply in the community. If I do all of these, I'm going to improve access to contraceptive in the community, and I'm going to reduce short bed spacing and improve child outcomes in this community. So that's a sort of logic behind it. You're basically saying that by doing community outreaches, by training providers, by providing commodities in health facilities, in summary, by addressing both demand and supply side, you will be able to radically change the problem of unintended pregnancy in the community. And also, you are going to address the problem of short bed spacing in this community. And all of these will also result in improved child outcomes, improved reproductive outcomes, as well as empowerment of women in this community. So that sort of logical thinking needs to be laid out also in a diagram. And then you are basically saying that I have some assumptions as well that I'm thinking about. I assume that although this project might be sensitive because issues of family planning, issues of family planning are sensitive, but you are saying, despite all the sensitivity around it, it's possible to still navigate this sensitivity around it to be able to accomplish this. So you lay out some sets of assumptions that needs to be present for your studies to be successful as a part of the logical way of thinking about it. So a theory of training provides a clear framework linking project activities to desired outcomes and impact. It demonstrates how the intervention will achieve its goals. It describes the issue being addressed and its root causes. It sets the foundation for the theory of change narrative. It also outlines the steps and activities required to achieve outcomes, and it shows logical connection between input, outputs, and outcome. It identifies key factors or conditions necessary for success, helps funders to understand risk and feasibility, and establishes metrics for evaluating progress and measuring impacts. So often, of course, you can also have a log frame that lists out all the outcomes you want to measure and when. And your indicators, and now you define the indicators, and now you want to measure the indicator. That's just another thing to think about. And then it includes methods for monitoring and assessing results. One way to think about inputs, output, and outcome, as well as impact, is an input might just be the set of activities you are implementing. So all the training, but the supply of commodity, the community outreaches are examples of inputs. They are the intervention you are implementing. Now, the outputs are the immediate outcomes from your interventions. Say, for example, I've trained providers. The immediate output of that training is that the knowledge would increase. That change in knowledge itself is an output. Things like training reports, training evaluation are clear outputs from the project. An outcome is the change that occurs as a result of training. And that change is a bit more intermediate and long-term, not immediate. So you would see that after the training, the attitude as well as the behavior of provider might change. That in itself is an outcome. Although change in behavior often takes time, so it's more or less an intermediate outcome. Now, when you're thinking about impact is a bit more long-term. Impact might be that in that community, unintended pregnancy reduced, child outcomes improve, and women empowerment improve. Those are a bit long-term, and those are examples of what you think as impact of the project. And it's unlikely that you realize all of that within the life cycle of project, because projects are usually between 3 to 5 years projects. So it might take even longer than that to realize all these impacts in a community, for example. So as such, you might not necessarily be able to document impact. And impact are also influenced by other things happening beyond your project. Your project is probably a small microcosm of what's going on in the community. Other organizations are also contributing in their own ways. Government is also doing their own bit. So all of these put together is what will result in impact. Maybe not your own project only. So once you've done this, you want to then think about how are you going to measure and evaluate success. How are you going to measure success? How are you going to monitor, evaluate, and document learning? I think it's important to also include this component and incorporate learning to improve the project's implementation and impacts. You do this by outlining methods for collecting data regularly to assess activities and outputs. You want to specify tools and techniques for monitoring. Do you want to do field visits? Do you want to do client exit surveys, which is widely used for monitoring? Do you want to do satisfactions? How are you going to measure? What tools are you going to use? Or techniques are you going to use for monitoring? Let me give you an example of a project that I'm implementing. I'm implementing a randomized control trial for adolescent mothers. And I'm providing conditional cash transfer, conditional return to school, or uptake of vocational training. I'm providing subsidized childcare so that their kids are taken care of while they return to school. And I'm also, providing life skill education. And I've designed several tools to monitor the implementation of that intervention. I'm assessing the fidelity of the intervention. Are they delivering this life skill education based on the curriculum we provided? So I want to see what was taught per session and whether they cover all the content, whether the time was sufficient to cover the content. So there's a tool I've designed to monitor that. I have a tool that the facilitators can fill, and I also have a tool that my research assistants can complete when they go on field visits to monitor. They also have observational tools to monitor the condition in which those life skills are being delivered. I've got tools to also conduct interviews with the facilitators and with the beneficiaries. All of these are important as a way to monitor the delivery of that intervention. As you know, if interventions are not delivered with adequate fidelity, it might not work. So it's not just that the intervention did not work. It's just that the intervention wasn't even delivered in the correct dosage, with the correct fidelity. That might be the reason why it did not work. So it's important to do proper monitoring. Typically in a large-scale program, you want to have pause and reflect sections to say what's working, what's not working. Can we adapt our program to more be able to address it? Yeah, many funders are allowing program adaptation, especially for large-scale program. I'm also part of a project that it's worth £200 million, and it's being implemented in 27 countries. So such large-scale program often come with the flexibility of program adaptation. So I'm part of the evidence and learning team that is helping the program to do program adaptation, to document learning, to do proper monitoring, to verify results. All of these are part of what I'm doing on this large-scale program. So typically, you want to be able to pause and reflect. You want to be able to document lessons on what's working, what approaches are working to reach young people, to reach people with disability, to reach the poorest with SRHR services. You want to document all the program. So you don't want to run into the same problem you run into in phase one. So documenting tacit knowledge is extremely important as well, such that to your program and a new person is coming, you can share all those experiences and then things can run smoothly. And then if there are issues that you need to you want to adapt, you're able to track recommendations and make those changes. So also you want to include metrics, indicators, and benchmarks for assessing effectiveness. You want to highlight processes for reflecting on, analyzing data to refine strategy. So it's just not about collecting monitoring data. You want to regularly analyze them, make recommendations to adapt the program. But more importantly, it's also part of the process evaluation of the program. And then you want to show insights from MEL activities. You want to show insight on how the MEL activities will inform decision making and improve future interventions. So it's both for the program you are doing and for future programs. And then you want to detail how funders, beneficiaries, and partners will be involved in MEL activities to ensure transparency and relevance, and explain how findings will be communicated to stakeholders and used to demonstrate accountability. In fact, some funders might want you to write up a public accountability in your proposal. Funders like IDRC often require that. Having done all of these, you want to do a budget, as well as justify why that budget is needed to accomplish the activities you've set out. So it's important to familiarize yourself with the funding restrictions. Some funders will say you can't buy computers, there are restrictions on travel, there are restrictions on the salary of the PI, or they put some restriction on indirect costs. Some might allow up to 5%, 7%, 10%, 15%, 20% indirect costs, even higher than that. So all of this is important to familiarize yourself with the funding restrictions so that you are budgeting based on what's permissible. Some funders will not allow you to buy a car, even though your organization needs a car to run your office. Some grants will certainly not allow you to buy a car with their money. So you can't include cars, for example, in your budget when it's not permitted. So it's important to explain how the donors fund will be allocated and utilized to support project implementation, budget for personnel salaries based on LOE, supplies, materials, equipment, travel expense, overhead costs, and other relevant expenditures. And you also want to specify the total amount requested from the donor and include additional funding sources or in-kind contribution, because some donor might also say that you co-fund by up to 10%. So if you have all those, or if you have people that can work for free on the project as well, because their time is already covered on other projects, those are in-kind contribution, examples of in-kind contribution. All in all, you want to demonstrate that the fund will be used strategically to achieve the project's objectives. Now, grants differ. There are grants that require a lot of staff time and staff salary, and there are those that require spending money in a committee. Say for example, if you are doing a cash transfer project, for example, you are spending a lot of that money on program implementation because you are giving the money out to beneficiaries, for example. So it might be heavily loaded on program implementation, or it might be heavily loaded on staff time. But it's important to justify why that's what's needed to accomplish the objectives you set. So you need to justify some, Now, and like we said, budgets for personnel salary based on LOE. LOE simply means level of effort. So in a typical year, how many working days will Anthony or Bernard or Han be spending on the project? That's what level of efforts really mean. If that's the only thing the person will be doing Monday to Friday for the whole year, that person will be budget for at 100%. If the person, does other things, maybe they only have half of their time available to work on the project, you budget for them at 50%, and then they cover 50% of their salary. So that's how you think about the budget. But often, I don't expect many of you to do the budget yourself. You might need an accountant in your organization to sit with you to do the budgets. All you probably need to do is to be able to lay out all the activities you want to implement, such that an accountant can cost it for you and then be able to justify it for you. And then maybe Bernard and Anne can think about bringing some people from our accounting department to take everyone through how we do budgeting in typical proposal. That might just be another practical demonstration of how to budget. Now, it's also important to reflect on what risks are there and how am I going to mitigate those risks. Because it's important that you are as prepared as possible. It's important to risk are things that may or may not happen. If something is going to happen 100%, it's no longer a risk. It's an outcome that is inevitable, right? So a risk is something that may or may not happen. So it has potentiality of happening. So what are all the things that are likely to happen that can hinder the implementation of your project or limit you from accomplishing your objective and attaining the results and outcome you set out? So it's important to think about that. So you want to list potential risks that could affect the project's success. It could be financial risk, it could be operational risk, it could be environmental risk, social risk. One risk might be that staff turnout is typically a risk in many projects because people move for different reasons to other organizations. So there are chances that they may not remain, except maybe you work in organizations that are so stable. Say, for example, universities are relatively stable, but even many universities now are also losing staff to other universities as well. So it's also not guaranteed that people in universities will remain there forever. So staff attrition is one risk that can also limit the implementation of a project. Imagine someone that is crucial, your project manager leaves. What's going to happen? So you think of mitigation. That even though there's a possibility of staff turnover, it will take us within so months to find a replacement. And then we have 2 people, 3 people working on one thing, such that if one leaves, the work can continue. Those are mitigation you are thinking about when you are drafting this section of a proposal. You also want to analyze the likelihood and potential impact of each identified risk on the project. Typically, you also want to rate the risk. What is the likelihood of this happening and what is the impact? How damaging is the impact? So you want to also do those sort of rating. You want to outline specific actions or measures to prevent or minimize the risk. You want to include contingency plan to address challenges if they arise. You want to describe how risk will be regularly monitored throughout the project. You want to highlight strategies for adapting to unforeseeable circumstances, and you want to explain how risk and mitigation plan will be communicated to funders, partners, and stakeholders to ensure transparency and accountability. Now, in extreme cases, if you provide services to people, SRA services to people, there are chances that mistakes can happen or accidents can happen. That's an extreme form of risk that can happen, that can really even have implications for your funders if you are being sued and asked to pay damages. So it's a financial risk, it's a professional risk, and it's a reputation risk. So you need to think about all of these in relation to your project and how you're going to adapt or minimize the risk. So many funders will demand for this section. Also, you will need to include a timeline or a work plan. In the first 3 months, what are the immediate things you will do in the next 6 months, in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years? It's a 5-year project. What are you going to do in the 5th year? So it's very easy to do. You just list out all your activities, and then in the row section or in the column section, you list out the months. You can do every month on a month-by-month basis. Maybe say 30 months or 60 months. or 100 months project, you list them out. If it's too long, you might just do first quarter, second quarter of years of 2025, 26, 27. You can just do that, and then it's a bit more. It's a smaller table as opposed to accounting for every month. And then you just put a heat map. You can color code it when activities will happen, and then it's easy for reviewers to see what you aim to accomplish. And it's important that you are very granular in listing out your activities. So if you are doing a research project, you know you want to write a protocol, you want to apply for ethics approval, you want to train field workers, you want to do data collection, you want to do data cleaning and analysis, transcription, you want to do report writing, manuscript writing. All of these activities you're going to lay out and indicate when you will do each of them. And that's what is needed or expected in this section. Typically, you do it in a table, you don't even need to do narration. But then the activities need to align with the objective of the study, and then the timeline also needs to align with the timeline set by the funder. So strategy for success include a timeline of milestones able to illustrate progress. It's very visually appealing as opposed to writing it down in prose. Provide examples of successfully completing similar tasks within the timeline and budget constraints, e.g. subject enrollment in a study. Now, personnel is also extremely important, and you might propose a very good idea. In fact, some proposals fail, not because the idea is not relevant, because the idea is innovative, but because of the personnel that they put forward to implement the idea. So it's important to take this section very, very seriously, because they are going to judge this section. Typically, what you want to do is, when you look at the request for proposal and you look at what the funder is looking for, ask yourself, do you have expertise to implement this project? If the answer is yes, so meaning you describe the expertise you have, right? If the answer is partially, you ask yourself, what other expertise are needed? Who can I reach out to from what organization that can bring that expertise? So you might, instead of going alone for the grant application, you might consider partnering with a sister institution to go together, because that would make or mar the success of your proposal. Now, if they need an health economics, do you have an economist? Maybe they want to do value for money evaluation, and you've not done value for money evaluation, and it's a requirement for the proposal. Can you reach out to an economist who has the expertise in doing value for money evaluation, for example, or cost effectiveness evaluation, and add that to your team? Remember, you are maybe an SRHR researcher. You have expertise in doing RCT. You've done all of these things. Or a program implementer, you've been implementing projects. Do you have a strong M&E team that can do all of this? So you go together. So it's not just about writing this section very well, but it's just about thinking about what sort of expertise are needed. So there is an expertise matrix. You want to list out all the expertise required. List out the name of the members of your team in the role section, expertise needed in the column, and then match who has this. This one has 10 years experience, he's done this, he's done that. Okay, it's not done this. That sort of table might help you map whether you have expertise for all the skills, experiences required, and it's important to do that. You want to then provide a brief introduction to the key personnel involved in the project. You want to align their key roles and responsibility within the project. You want to summarize the relevant skills, experience, and expertise of each team member, demonstrate how their background align with the project's goal and objectives. Identify the principal investigator, co-investigator along with their primary responsibilities. Explain why the proposed personnel are essential for the project's success. Also, you want to highlight how their contributions will impact the project's outcome. Mention any collaboration, partnership, and advisory role that enhance the project, and then include concise resume or bios for each team members if required by the funder. Also, you might also do a small organogram of who is going to report to who is going to lead specific activities. And how are they going to report to the PI or to the lead? Now, resources and institutions are also really important. If you are a small organization, you might also want to demonstrate what you've done previously related to the project. Have you implemented similar projects in the future? So it's just about telling stories about the capacity, organizational capacity. Also, if you are doing an NIH application, they typically would ask about equipment, space, IT resources, calls, animals. All these things are NIH grants requirements that you need to reflect on. They want to know about institutional support. Support is available within your institution to implement the project. Did you have resources necessary to complete this project? You need to take this section seriously as well, because it's important that you lay out that your institutions is not only well-resourced, but they're also supportive of implementing the research or the project you want to implement. Now, these are cross-cutting things to consider. Competence is really important. You want to prove that you can deliver. Proving that you can deliver is crucial. Demonstrate competence by showing what you have achieved in the past. Convince of the ability to deliver the research. Form a winning team and get the best PI. Sometimes you might write the proposal and you might not be the best PI to carry it out. And it's just what it is. Sometimes, maybe PI is also someone that is a lot more junior because it's a capacity building kind of fund. Or it's a bit someone that is a bit more senior. Mind you, in fact, our executive director described grant proposal. She made an analogy that's really important. That, winning a grant application is like a football team winning a football match. You need defenders, you need midfielders, you need goalkeepers, and you need strikers. Strikers tend to take lots of the glory, right? But then strikers will not be able to score goals without midfielders, without wingers, without defenders, and without good goalkeeper. They probably won't even win the match. So it's always important to build a team like you would build a winning football team, right? You get the best people possible to be part of your team, because that might be the major difference. I once wrote an NIH application, and in fact, the innovation was really high, but the rating on the team was low. It was on mental health, and the team do not necessarily have enough mental health expertise, and that was a major issue. Now, sometimes if you are bringing people together to work in collaboratively, it's important to also demonstrate that you've worked together in the past. So it's not just about, this call is coming, let me reach out to this person, even though I've not worked with the person before, because people might have concerns about whether it's possible for you to work together because you've not worked before. So if you've done anything before, it's always important to also reflect on the collaborations between the team that you're putting together previously. So important to form a winning team and get the best player. Why should the organization be the one that receives the fund? So you want to promise excellent research. Also, sustainability is one thing that funders also ask for, and it simply means how you thought about what you will do when funders run out of money. What's the exit strategy? Because funding are limited. They are not there forever. They are not in forever supply. So it's important to see, how do you carry on this work beyond this funder that you are currently requesting money for? So it's important to think about sustainability. Now, another point to also make is some organizations, some funders might ask for youth involvement or involvement of marginalized people. Some might even ask you to reflect on diversity, equity, and diversity, equity, and just sort of mix up on the last one. But on diversity of your team, diversity of who will benefit from your intervention. Are you leaving out the people that are most affected? How are you involving young people? If it's a program for young people, how are you involving young people in the design, in the implementation, even in the monitoring and evaluation? All of this you might want to reflect on how you're involving young people. And if you're not thinking about that, it's important that you think about youth involvement in your proposal application. I will stop there and take questions. Thank you for listening. I'm sure we try to do this within 1 hour, but everything I've said might take you days or months to even write if I draft a proposal application. But I've summarized it as much as possible, and I believe the team is still available to do a deep dive for specific sections and do a better demonstration. Thank you.